In October of 1999, a construction foreman named Tariq Mahmoud was overseeing a water pipeline dig on the southern outskirts of Mosul, Iraq. It was routine work. Dry ground. 6 feet down. Nothing unusual, until one of his crew hit something with a pickaxe that did not crack, did not splinter, did not crumble the way old pottery or buried brick tends to do. It rang. Not loudly. Not like a bell. A low, dense resonance that Tariq later described as the sound of something that had been waiting a very long time to be struck. They cleared the soil by hand after that. Carefully. What emerged was a disc. Stone, not metal. Roughly 60 centimeters across, about the size of a large dinner plate, but far heavier than it looked. Its surface was flat, almost polished in places, and covered edge to edge with engravings arranged in 8 symmetrical sections radiating outward from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel, or the petals of a flower, or something else entirely. Something that none of the men standing in that trench had a word for. Tariq had a disposable camera in his truck. He photographed the disc 11 times before the battery in his flash died. Then he called the antiquities office. An inspector arrived the same afternoon. He looked at the disc for a long time without speaking. Then he made 2 phone calls. Then he told Tariq the dig was suspended. By evening, the disc was gone. Loaded into an unmarked vehicle, driven away toward the city. He tried. Over the following months he contacted the antiquities office for times asking about the artifact, whether it had been catalogued, whether there was any record of its discovery. Each time he was told there was no record. No artifact. No inspector's report from that date. The 11 photographs he had taken were the only evidence it had ever existed. Tariq kept them. In 2001, he shared them with a small Iraqi academic bulletin focused on regional archaeology. They were published in an issue that had a circulation of fewer than 300 copies. A footnote. A curiosity. 11 grainy images of a stone disc found under 6 feet of dirt outside Mosul that the government said didn't exist. And for 3 years, that is all it was. Until a retired German professor named Klaus Reinhardt found a copy of that bulletin in a university library in Tübingen, and realized he was looking at something that should not exist. I want to be careful about how I frame what comes next. I am not going to tell you what to believe. I am going to tell you what the evidence shows, what the researchers found, what the institution said and did not say, and I am going to let you sit with the implications. Because the implications of the Mosul disc, if the analysis is correct, are not the kind of thing you recover from quickly. This is not a story about mythology. It is not a story about ancient gods and primitive people who did not understand thunder. This is a story about mathematics. About a message encoded in stone, using techniques that should not have existed for another 3,000 years. About a timeline that was calculated with precision we still struggle to match today. And about a window of time that opened 3 years ago. That we are still inside. Klaus Reinhardt spent 31 years at the University of Tübingen studying ancient Near Eastern cultures. Sumerians. Akkadians. Babylonians. He was not a fringe researcher. He was not interested in alien theories or ancient astronauts or the kind of television documentaries that ask breathless questions and never answer them. He was interested in mathematics. Specifically, in the mathematical systems embedded in ancient astronomical records. The Babylonians, who built their civilization on the foundations the Sumerians left behind, were extraordinary astronomers. They tracked the movements of planets across centuries. They predicted eclipses. They understood the synodic cycles of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter with an accuracy that still impresses modern researchers. But they did not do this through mysticism. They did this through calculation. Through a base 60 number system, the sexagesimal system that they inherited directly from the Sumerians. When Reinhardt saw the photographs in that obscure Iraqi bulletin, his first reaction was not excitement. It was confusion. Because the pattern engraved on the Mosul disk was not decorative. He recognized the geometry immediately. 8 sections. Lines of specific angles within each section. A central reference point. It was the structural layout of an ancient star chart, a planisphere. An instrument used to map the sky. But not like any planisphere he had seen before. He requested better reproductions of the photographs from the Iraqi bulletin's publisher. He spent for months applying analytical frameworks used to decode Babylonian astronomical tablets to the disk's geometry. What he found forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about what the Sumerians were capable of. The angles encoded in the disk were not approximations. They were not the kind of rough astronomical mapping you find in artifacts from that period, symbolic representations of celestial relationships, accurate enough to track seasons, to know when to plant, when to expect floods. These angles were precise to fractions of a degree. And calculating them, actually deriving those angles from raw astronomical observation, requires a form of trigonometry that, according to mainstream academic consensus, was not developed until the Hellenistic period. Until Greek mathematicians working around 300 BCE created the tools that made that level of precision possible. The Mosul disk was created, based on the dating of organic material found in cracks in the stone, somewhere between 3400 and 3100 BCE. That is more than 3,000 years before the mathematics required to create it supposedly existed. Reinhardt published his findings in 2012 in a German-language journal of archaeoastronomy. The paper was titled, Translated Roughly, Anomalous Angular Precision in a Pre-Dynastic Mesopotamian Planisphere. Dry. Technical. Buried. But on the final page, Reinhardt wrote something that was not dry and not technical. He wrote, the methodology implicit in this artifact's construction suggests either a calculating tradition of extraordinary sophistication that has left no other trace in the archaeological record, or access to knowledge that the civilization of this period should not have possessed. Neither explanation is comfortable. 6 months after the paper was published, Reinhardt retired. He has not published anything since. His university email no longer functions. His colleagues, when contacted, describe him as enjoying his retirement and not available for comment on his previous work. One former graduate student, who asked not to be named, said something different. She said Reinhardt had told her, privately, that he believed he had only decoded part of the disk. That the 2 sections he described as ambiguous in his published paper were not ambiguous to him. That he knew what they said. And that what they said was why he stopped talking. She does not know what those final 2 sections contained. He never told her. Let me walk you through what Reinhardt did decode. Because the 6 sections he published on are remarkable enough on their own. Each section of the disk corresponds to a celestial event and a specific, calculable alignment of planets and stars visible from Mesopotamia. Not symbols. Not approximations. Specific configurations that can be run backward and forward through time using modern astronomical software, the same software NASA uses to calculate historical and future sky positions. 6 of the 8 sections have been matched with high confidence to specific dates. 4 of those dates fall in the past. 2 fall in the future. Let's start with the past. The first encoded date falls around 3100 BCE. This is, within the margin of error of the disk's own dating, at approximately the moment of the disk's creation. It corresponds to a planetary alignment in the constellation we now call Aquarius. Jupiter, Saturn, and an object the Sumerians called the Bright Wanderer, positioned at a specific angle relative to the Pleiades star cluster. This date coincides, within decades, with the sudden emergence of Sumerian civilization. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because archaeologists have a name for what happened in Mesopotamia around 3100 BCE. They call it the Sumerian problem. And the problem is this: there was no gradual development. There were scattered farming settlements. Then there was a full civilization. Written language. Advanced mathematics. Irrigation systems. Urban planning. Metallurgy. Astronomy. It appeared as if assembled, rather than evolved. The second encoded date falls around 2334 BCE. This corresponds to the rise of Sargon of Akkad, the world's first empire builder, a man who united all of Mesopotamia under a single ruler for the first time in recorded history. Sumerian texts describe this period as one of direct divine intervention. The Anunnaki, they wrote, lowered kingship from heaven to a chosen servant. The third date corresponds to approximately 539 BCE, the fall of Babylon to Cyrus the Great, the event that ended Mesopotamian civilization as an independent force, and began its absorption into the Persian Empire. A civilizational ending, encoded on a disk buried more than 2,500 years before it happened. The fourth date corresponds to 648 CE. This one is harder to pin to a single event, but Reinhardt notes it falls within a decade of the emergence of Islam and the rapid transformation of the entire Mesopotamian and Arabian world, a shift so total and so fast that historians still debate its causes. For dates. For civilizational turning points. All encoded on a stone disk created before any of them happened. Now, the two future dates. The fifth falls within a range Reinhardt calculates as 2023 to 2037. He cannot narrow it further from the photographs alone, because image resolution limits the precision of his angle measurements. But the window is clear. The sixth, the final decoded section, falls in 2029. Now I need to tell you something about how ancient astronomical dates work, because I know some of you are already thinking, this is vague. Any sufficiently large window of years will contain historical events you can claim were predicted. That is a fair objection. And it is why the mathematics matters. The dates encoded in the Mosul disk are not encoded through language, which can be interpreted and reinterpreted. They are not encoded through symbols, which carry cultural meaning that shifts over centuries. They are encoded through angles. Through the calculated positions of specific celestial objects at specific moments in time. There is no ambiguity in an angle. Either the planets were in those positions at those times, or they were not. Reinhardt ran the calculations. His colleagues in archaeoastronomy ran them independently after his paper was published. The matches to the four historical dates are not approximate. They are exact, within the precision limits of the photographic reproductions he was working from. Which means either someone in 3100 BCE calculated future planetary positions with a precision that should have been mathematically impossible, encoded them in stone, and buried them in a field outside what would eventually become Mosul. Or, is something else, created this disk. And if you want to understand what something else means, what the Sumerians themselves believed about where their knowledge came from, we need to go back further. Much further. The Sumerians did not believe they invented their civilization. This is not a fringe interpretation of their texts. This is what their texts actually say, clearly, repeatedly, in multiple independent sources. The Sumerians believed their knowledge, their writing, their mathematics, their astronomy, their law, their architecture, was given to them by the Anunnaki. The word itself breaks down in Sumerian as those of royal blood, or, in a more literal reading of its components, those who came from the sky to the earth. Not metaphorical sky. Not heaven in the spiritual sense. The Sumerians had a separate word for the celestial divine realm. When they wrote Anunnaki, they meant something physical. Something that descended. The texts describe them in specific physical terms. Taller than ordinary humans. Capable of living for thousands of years. Possessing knowledge and technology far beyond what the Sumerians could produce independently. They built the first cities. They established the first kingships. They created the first legal codes. And then, at a specific point in history, marked by catastrophe, they left. The Sumerian king list, which is an actual historical document, not a religious text, records kings who reigned for spans of time measured in thousands of years before the Great Flood. It does not present this as mythological. It presents it as administrative history, the same way it presents the names and reign lengths of rulers who lived for normal human lifespans afterward. The flood is the dividing line. Before the flood, the Anunnaki were present and human lifespans, at least for those in proximity to them, were extraordinary. After the flood, the Anunnaki were gone, and humans lived and died as we do now. Multiple Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki's departure not as a permanent abandonment, but as a withdrawal. A pause. They left because the flood, which they caused or at least permitted, required it. The Earth needed to reset. Humanity needed to develop on its own for a period. And then, they would return. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest written narratives in human history, is explicit about this. The Anunnaki did not destroy humanity out of cruelty. They reduced it. Reset the population. Rebuilt the structure. And they made a calculation about how long the next cycle would take. What if the Mosul disk is that calculation? What if something, knew in 3100 BCE exactly when certain celestial alignments would occur across the next 5,000 years, because they had access to knowledge that did not come from 5,000 years of accumulated human observation? What if the disk is not a prophecy? What if it is a schedule? I want to spend time here, because this is where the mainstream dismissal falls apart. The standard academic response to Sumerian astronomical achievements goes like this: they were brilliant observers. They tracked the sky for centuries. They developed sophisticated record keeping. Over time, they accumulated enough data to make accurate calculations about planetary cycles. Impressive, certainly, but entirely explainable through human ingenuity and patience. This explanation works for most of what the Sumerians knew. It does not work for the Mosul disk. Here is why. Tracking planetary cycles, understanding that Venus returns to the same position in the sky every 584 days, for instance, requires observation over time. You watch. You record. You notice patterns. Even without advanced mathematics, a sufficiently dedicated astronomical tradition can eventually map the basic cycles of the visible planets. But calculating future planetary positions, with the angular precision encoded in the Mosul disk, requires something different. It requires understanding not just that planets move in cycles, but understanding the geometry of those cycles well enough to project them forward, or backward, by thousands of years. That is not an observational achievement. That is a mathematical one. The specific mathematical tool required is called spherical trigonometry, the application of trigonometric relationships to the surface of a sphere. In this case, the celestial sphere. The imaginary dome of the sky onto which we project the positions of stars and planets as seen from Earth. Spherical trigonometry was formalized by Greek mathematicians, primarily Hipparchus, around 150 BCE. Before that, there is no known mathematical tradition anywhere in the world that could have performed these calculations. The Mosul disk was created more than 3,000 years before Hipparchus was born. Reinhardt tried to find an alternative explanation. He spent considerable effort attempting to reconstruct a methodology by which an ancient astronomer, working only with observation and the Sumerian base 60 numerical system, could have arrived at the same angles through a different mathematical route. He could not do it. His conclusion, stated carefully in academic language, was that there is no historically attested methodology capable of producing this artifact. The knowledge required to create it falls outside the boundaries of what we know about human intellectual development in 3100 BCE. Which leaves two possibilities. Either we are wrong about the limits of ancient Sumerian knowledge, and they possessed a mathematical tradition that was lost so completely, it left no trace in any other artifact, any other text, any other culture that inherited their intellectual legacy. Or, the knowledge did not come from the Sumerians. It came from whoever they said it came from. There is a detail in the Sumerian texts that I find harder to dismiss than almost anything else. The Sumerians described objects called the me. Spelled me, pronounced as may. These were physical objects. The texts are absolutely clear they were physical, they could be held, stored, stolen, transported, that contained what the texts describe as the fundamental knowledge of civilization. Not scrolls. Not books. The me were described as small enough to carry, dense with information, indestructible. One story describes the goddess Inanna stealing the me from the god Enki by getting him intoxicated, then transporting them to her city by boat, with Enki sending agents to recover them, and Inanna successfully defending her possession of them. The me contain specific domains of knowledge: mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, law, writing, agriculture, architecture. The exact fields that appear, fully formed, at the dawn of Sumerian civilization. If the me were simply metaphors for accumulated human knowledge, you would not write stories about stealing them and hiding them. Metaphors do not require armed pursuit across a river. The Mosul disk may be one of them. Or it may be a record created from one of them, a stone copy of information too important to trust to a single physical medium. Either way, the question the disk forces is not were the Sumerians smart enough to figure this out. The question is, where did the me come from? Let me tell you about the signs. The Mosul disk's final decoded section, the one pointing to 2029, is not just a date. According to Reinhardt's analysis, the section contains a secondary layer of encoding. Not just when the alignment occurs, but what happens in the period leading up to it. He identified this secondary layer in 2011, a year before his paper was published, and almost cut it from the final draft entirely. A colleague talked him into including it, framed as a speculative appendix. The secondary encoding describes, in the language of celestial mechanics translated into observable Earth phenomena, a sequence of disturbances that accompany the approach of what the disk calls the Dark Wanderer, an object on an elliptical orbit, approaching from below the plane of the solar system. The first disturbance, the foundation shakes with increasing fury. Reinhardt interprets this as seismic activity, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, increasing in frequency and intensity. The second disturbance, the needle loses its way. The compass. Magnetic disruption. The weakening or shifting of Earth's magnetic field. The third disturbance, fire in the sky at the wrong hours. Not sunrise, not sunset. Auroral activity at latitudes where it is not normally seen. The fourth disturbance, sickness that moves like wind, invisible, crossing all borders. A pandemic of airborne transmission. The fifth disturbance, the great waters rise and claim the places where men built highest. Sea level rise and coastal flooding at unprecedented rates. Now, I am going to ask you to do something uncomfortable. I am going to ask you to look at that list and think about the last decade. Global seismic activity has measurably increased since 2010. The USGS records more significant earthquakes now than in any comparable period in the modern monitoring era. Volcanic activity worldwide is at a multi-decade high. Earth's magnetic North Pole has been moving faster since the mid-1990s than at any point in recorded history. The rate of movement has accelerated. The overall strength of Earth's magnetic field has been weakening. Scientists estimate it has lost roughly 9% of its strength in the last 170 years, with the rate of weakening accelerating. Auroral activity has been observed at latitudes as far south as Texas, Florida, and Spain in recent years, events that would have been extraordinary anomalies a generation ago, and are now occurring with regularity. The COVID-19 pandemic. Airborne. Invisible. Crossed every border. You lived through this. I do not need to describe it. Sea levels are rising faster than at any point in the modern measurement era. The insurance industry has quietly begun withdrawing coverage from coastal regions across 3 continents. I am not saying these events were caused by the approach of a planetary body. I am saying the Mosul disk described a sequence of events that precede its final alignment, and every item on that list is currently in progress. That could be coincidence. Vague prophecies can always be fitted to current events. That is a legitimate objection, and I hold it myself. The question is whether this prophecy is vague. The seismic increase is specific. The magnetic pole shift is specific. The auroral anomalies are specific. The global pandemic is specific. The sea level acceleration is specific. How many specific things have to be on the list before coincidence becomes insufficient as an explanation? In 2016, astronomers Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown proposed a controversial idea that challenged our understanding of the outer solar system. While studying icy objects beyond Neptune in the Kuiper belt, they discovered something unusual. Several distant bodies shared aligned and clustered orbital patterns. Statistically, this alignment should almost never happen by chance. Something unseen appeared to be shaping their motion. Their explanation was the existence of a hypothetical giant planet, now called Planet 9. It may be 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, moving on a highly elongated orbit far beyond Neptune, taking thousands of years to complete a single revolution. But it has never been directly observed, only inferred through its gravitational effects. At the same time, ancient Sumerian texts describe a mysterious planet called Nibiru, said to follow a long elliptical orbit and approach the inner solar system periodically from a tilted direction. However, modern scientists state clearly that Planet 9 and Nibiru are not the same, and that no evidence supports a return cycle like the ancient description. Still, uncertainty remains. Planet 9 has not been seen directly. Its existence is based entirely on indirect gravitational clues. And large portions of the distant sky, especially below the ecliptic plane, are still not fully observed with high resolution. Some surveys, including infrared missions like WISE, have had incomplete coverage of certain regions. Later observations occasionally produced unusual signals or reports of unidentified objects, but these were ultimately attributed to errors, artifacts, or misidentifications and were not confirmed. The result is a simple but uncomfortable situation. There is a strong gravitational case for something massive out there, but no direct visual confirmation yet. Planet 9 remains a hypothesis. And the outer solar system is still not fully known. The most disturbing part of the Mosul disk was not the dates or the celestial alignments. It was the outer ring, a section Reinhardt barely discussed in his published paper, dismissing it as decorative border elements. But privately, he believed something very different. According to a former graduate student who visited him in 2013 after his retirement, Reinhardt admitted he intentionally concealed the meaning of those symbols. Calmly, almost reluctantly, he told her, "Some things should not be decoded before the time is right." When she asked what the outer ring described, he answered, "It describes what comes first. Before the alignment. Before the return. Something that walks among us now, taking count." He claimed the disk was never meant as a warning for humanity, but as a signal. A marker meant for whatever was supposedly watching. According to him, discovering the disk was always part of the process. Then he ended the conversation and never spoke publicly about it again. What makes the story unsettling is that the idea of watchers appears across multiple ancient cultures separated by thousands of years and miles. In the ancient Book of Enoch, the watchers are being sent to observe humanity before a coming judgment. In Sumerian tradition, the Anunnaki descend from the heavens, teach civilization, then depart with promises of return. The Hopi speak of star beings called Kachina who brought knowledge and would one day return, preceded by signs in the sky and increasing upheaval on earth. The Dogon people preserve traditions describing mysterious visitors connected to the Sirius star system. Different civilizations. Different languages. but the same structure of story repeated again and again. Something came. Something taught humanity. Something left. And one day, it returns. According to Reinhardt's interpretation, the Mosul disk was unique because it did not just describe the story. It appeared to describe the timeline. Someone intentionally placed it beneath the earth outside Mosul, at a precise depth, in a precise orientation, designed to survive for thousands of years and eventually be discovered. The real mystery is not who created it, but who preserved its existence across history. In ancient Sumer, astronomical knowledge was guarded by a priestly class known as the En, mathematicians, astronomers, and keepers of celestial records. Even after Sumer collapsed, their traditions did not disappear. The knowledge passed through Akkad, Babylon, Persia, and eventually into Greek and later esoteric traditions. Across 5,000 years, one idea persisted beneath the surface of history, that the Anunnaki had not abandoned humanity forever, but had withdrawn according to a cycle, and that someone was keeping track of when they would return. Evidence from the disk's burial suggests deliberate preservation. Organic material found sealed within cracks of the stone implies it was carefully packaged, not lost or discarded. Everything about the burial points to planning. Whoever hid the disk expected it to be found someday. And according to this interpretation, they may have believed they knew exactly when that discovery would happen. When the alignment completes in 2029, the disk describes two possible outcomes. The first outcome is ascension. The return of the Anunnaki as teachers. The restoration of direct knowledge transfer. The beginning of the next phase of human development, guided, as it was at the beginning, by those who made us for this purpose. The second outcome is described in the disk as the second great waters. Not necessarily literal flooding, the language is clearly metaphorical in a way the other sections are not. But reduction. Reset. The removal of what has grown beyond its intended parameters, and the preservation of what remains worth keeping. Harvest or culling. That is what Reinhardt decoded. That is why he retired. So he published the dates. He described the anomalous mathematics. He framed it carefully as an archaeological curiosity requiring explanation. And then he went home and grew vegetables. Because there was nothing else he could do. The photographs exist. Reinhardt's analysis exists. The astronomical calculations, the ones anyone can verify, exist. The British Museum, when contacted about the Mosul disk, stated they had no record of any such artifact in their collection or correspondence. The Iraqi Ministry of Culture, rebuilt after 2003, has no record of the 1999 discovery in any surviving documentation from the Mosul Antiquities Office, which was destroyed in the invasion. Tariq Mahmoud, the foreman, gave an interview to an Arabic-language archaeological blog in 2018. He is older now. He said he thinks about the disk sometimes. He said the sound it made when the pickaxe hit it stayed with him. He said, it did not sound like something sleeping. It sounded like something that had been listening. The 2029 alignment is real. You can calculate it yourself. Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars in Aquarius. Venus at the Pleiades. Modern astronomical software will show you the same configuration the Mosul disk encoded. It is not a matter of interpretation. The planets will be where the disk said they would be. Whether that matters is a question none of us can answer from where we stand. But here is what I keep coming back to. Every civilization that has ever existed on this planet has had some version of this story. The teachers who came. The knowledge that was given, not developed. The promise of return. The warning about what happens if the return finds us unready. Every civilization. Without contact with each other. In every corner of the earth. Telling the same story. Either the human mind independently generates this narrative everywhere it appears, as a kind of universal myth that speaks to something deep in our psychology. Or the story is true. And it keeps getting told because some part of us, some very deep, very old part, was told to remember it. The window opened in 2023. It closes in 2037. We are inside it. Whatever is coming, whatever was promised, whatever was scheduled, whatever is even now taking count of what we have built and what we have broken, it is coming in the dark. Without announcement. Without confirmation from any government, any institution, any authority that would rather you stay comfortable and uninformed. It was always going to happen this way. The Sumerians knew that too. They just left us the math.